Well, many people can be called an expert, but to be qualified and accepted in a court of law is a particular process. I've testified in about 20 proceedings in 10 states, including United States federal court, through what's called a Daubert hearing, where you're literally put on trial before a federal judge to determine whether or not you really are an expert before you're allowed to testify. I'm here to tell you that I testified in federal court after a Daubert hearing, and that at the end of that trial, my client was awarded $6.5 million in damages. So I've testified in civil lawsuits, in criminal trials. I was qualified to testify in the James Arthur Ray case. That was the so-called sweat lodge guru who was responsible for the deaths of 3 individuals in a so-called sweat lodge in Arizona, in Sedona. And many people were hospitalized as a result of exhaustion and dehydration. Ray was later convicted on negligent homicide. I worked for the prosecution on that case and helped to put Mr. Ray where I think he really belonged, behind bars. And I've also testified in a number of child custody cases, in particular, quite a few regarding Jehovah's Witnesses, where people are concerned about medical care of children. Jehovah's Witnesses do not allow for blood transfusions, so that can be an issue in a custody case. And for that matter, other cases where one parent is in a controversial group, or it could be called a cult, and the other parent is not. And the issue is, what is in the best interest of the child? To be with the parent who is in the controversial group, and perhaps that child might be hurt in that group, or to be with a parent who is not in the group and therefore be safer. And I've testified in a number of those proceedings. I have worked with law enforcement agencies over the years, including the FBI, the BATF, and local law enforcement. In particular, I worked with the BATF before the Waco Davidian standoff. I had deprogrammed 2 Waco Davidians, one before the standoff and one actually during the standoff, a person who had been literally locked out by the raid. I certainly had no idea that the BATF was going to do a raid, but they came to me for information about the Waco Davidians, specifically because I was the only cult expert at that time in the 90s that had firsthand information and had worked to do an intervention with a Waco Davidian. Later, I would work with the FBI because a hacker attacked the Cult Education Institute website, and I would eventually find out who that hacker was. I found out that he was also attacking the websites of Rolling Stone magazine, Carnegie Mellon University, and many others with denial of service attacks. He was trying to crash these websites because they had information that he didn't want the public to see. Eventually, through my work with the FBI, he was arrested, tried, and I testified against him in trial. He was convicted and sentenced to 2 years in prison. Well, I have worked with social services within the United States. For example, there was a terrible cult group in Ohio that 21 children were removed by Child Protective Services after children suffered horrific beatings and abuse in the group. I worked with all of those 21 children with a caseworker through their social services in Ohio. I've also worked with the Ministry for Social Services of the State of Israel in their development of a kind of paper on cults that has been widely disseminated in the State of Israel. And I've also lectured in China, in Thailand, and more than 30 universities, including the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, Baylor, Carnegie Mellon, the University of Chicago, all by invitation because students at university campuses are frequently the targets of cult recruitment efforts. And those universities wanted their students educated in advance. to immunize them, if you will, and prepare them for what could be cult recruitment activities. I have done a lot of work with the media over the years. I've participated in 14 documentaries. The most recent was recently shown in Toronto at a film festival about deprogramming, about the life of the first cult deprogrammer, Ted Patrick. I was interviewed as part of that documentary. I've worked as an analyst professionally for CBS News, CBC of Canada, Nippon and Asahi of Japan, and I was a technical consultant to the actor Harvey Keitel when he played the role of a cult deprogrammer in the Disney Miramax film Holy Smoke, directed by Jane Campion. But over the years, I have just worked with virtually every news outlet, all the major networks, and also with networks in Europe, in Australia, in Asia, and also in the print media. So I've tried as hard as I can to bring that message of increased cult awareness to as many people as I could, using the media as a means for public education.